My name is Victor Furman. Some call me the Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. We know the number 13 to be traditionally viewed as an unlucky number, but for Nikól Rogers, it turned out to be the most transformative number of her life. Nikól Rogers is a speaker, writer, and empowerment coach who helps people reclaim their confidence, expand their perfect audience, and bring their fearless vision to life. She's taught her Zen Red method globally, which teaches you how to reframe how you think, feel, and act from a place of power rather than from fear or limiting beliefs. This has helped her clients become more confident versions of themselves and in alignment with their true purpose through her signature course, Powerful Presence. With a 20-year professional performance career that includes kicking eye-high as a rockette, Nikól has stood on countless stages. Her work is greatly influenced by her Zen practice, Qigong, nonviolent communication, and her decades of experience as an artist. Nikól teaches that the heart of transformation lies in discovering who you are. It is the journey that unlocks a person's greatest power and allows you to manifest a life you love. Her website is NikólRogers.com, and she joins me this week on Destination Unlimited to share her path and new book, 13, One Woman's Sacred Journey to Discovering Her Greatest Power. Please join me in welcoming to Destination Unlimited, Nikól Rogers. Welcome, Nikól.
Oh my gosh, Victor, thank you so much for having me. And I have to say for the audience that Victor and I have already literally come up with about 10 synchronicities in our life. So I'm just so excited that I'm here and that we're having this conversation. And I can't wait to see where it goes.
Nikól, I am grateful that you're joining us and sharing your message. So thank you.
Thank you.
Nikól, you share that as a toddler, you would walk around with two things, a blanket and a bucket. What was the significance of these items and how did your early path unfold?
Oh my gosh. So my mother said that I would not come out of the delivery room or come out into the delivery room unless the lighting was right. So they knew. And also I was named after a very close friend of my mom's named Nikól in high school, who was a performer. And so, because my first career was as a performer, that's where all this is going. But as a toddler, it's true. I had a blanket and a bucket. When I wasn't sitting in the bucket with the blanket, because I loved my blankie, then I was standing on top of the bucket in front of the TV with my arms up in the air, giving speeches.
Wow.
So
you wanted to be a performer from the time you were a toddler.
I did. It was in me. It was innate. You know, it began with dance and then some community theater. And when I have such gratitude for the really good teachers in my life. Now, I know I can say this to this audience that we have teachers across the board, right? Even in terrible situations, those people that we encounter are teachers for us. There's always something to learn. But when I think about being shaped in confidence, there are teachers that really stand out for me. And one of them was this amazing ballet teacher, dance teacher. I went to this arts and academic magnet school when I was 14. And my father was in the military and we moved around a lot. So my training was a bit all over the place. And it was funny because I thought I was great. Like I thought I was hot stuff. I just got my point shoes and I thought, oh yeah. And I had been admitted into this magnet school at the advanced level for dance. I showed up the first day of school and I was one of the worst in the class. like hands down. I was 14 and the 12-year-olds were already doing fouette turns and all kinds of advanced things in the middle of the room. And I was just learning how to do things holding onto the bar. But what was so amazing about that year was because she was such a affirming teacher, then I grew, and I grew incredibly. And at the end of the year, I was given most improved, and I was given a solo on point. And I remember coming up to her afterwards and I said, "Why did you put me in the advanced class?" And she looked at me and she said, "Because I saw potential in you." And so it was a beautiful turning point for me because I was experiencing being affirmed by a teacher and recognizing my own growth. But it also helped me make the decision at the tender age of 14 that I would not be a professional dancer only, because I already saw that I was behind if I wanted to be professional in just dance. So thankfully then in high school, I had an amazing theater teacher, an amazing choir teacher that again lifted me. They were so affirming. And when I started looking at college programs, I wanted to bring these all together. And what's the best way to do that? Musical theater. So I went to college for musical theater, and it just felt so wonderful. You know, it felt like all these things were able to be expressed in me. And I really thought that this was my path. It's very interesting, but I thought, oh, this is it. Like, I'm going to be a performer. I'm going to be on the stage, you know, playing characters and all of that. So yeah, the little girl with the bucket definitely had a vision, but had no idea that it would take such a turn.
And you became a dancer with the world famous Rockettes. What was that like?
Yeah. So my mother wants me to write a book about the Rockettes because there was a big change that happened for most of the history of the Rockettes. It was a privately owned company, and they really valued each individual dancer. And the good news is that the first year I was a Rockette, I got to be in that environment of being valued as an individual. But then they were bought out by a corporation. And there was a span of time from the first time I was a Rockette till the second time I was a Rockette of 7 years, actually. And so when I returned, there had been a lot of changes and the feel was different. And we used to joke, us in the line, we would be like, "I'm Rockette number 17. It was a joke, but it was also a real reflection. And so there wasn't a value on the individual. We really were just a face and a part of something corporate, you know? And so I loved being a Rockette, and I loved being able to have the opportunity to speak backstage and do the events and like inspire people. But as far as working for the company, it was so challenging because it felt like it didn't matter what I did. It was never going to be enough. And so thankfully, I got myself out of that toxic environment because it was just a wake-up call. Because at that point, I had been in the industry for a long time, and you and I talked about the voice inside. You know, there was definitely this discontent that was coming up around the industry. And for me as a dancer and a performer, and just being like, man, like my inner critic was getting so loud, and I didn't have any tools to deal with it. And I was feeling very lost. So it was a very mixed experience, very mixed.
And you share that in 1 year's time, everything fell apart for you in what you described as your life burning down. What happened?
Okay. So in 1 year's time, I went through a devastating divorce. I was robbed. I lost a dear friend to a heart attack, and I was in 2 car accidents.
Oh.
So that discontent that I was talking about, and there were a lot of things in my life that were just not working. And I was working very hard to drown that out in many different ways. I was having an affair in my marriage. I was drinking a lot. I was watching a ton of TV. I was listening to a lot of music. I wanted to ask for help, but I didn't know how to do it without my first husband knowing, because we had a joint bank account. But the truth was, I didn't understand what I was doing. I didn't understand why I had such destructive behavior. I'm like, what am I doing? I was trying to get pregnant. It wasn't happening. And it was like, why do I keep getting drawn back into an affair? This is destroying everything. Like, what am I doing? And I didn't have any tools around self-reflection or any of this stuff. So what happened for me is on Thanksgiving Day in 2012, my first husband knelt before me and said, I don't think I love you anymore. I don't think I want to be married anymore. And I don't think I want to have children. And then he shared that he was in love with someone else. And it was like the ground opened up and swallowed me whole. And everything came like crashing in. And I tried so hard to fix it. I tried so hard to save it. So I still wasn't getting it, even though here he is saying, I'm not on the same page as you anymore. And the next day, which was Black Friday, I heard a small voice that came up and said, you need meditation. And I remember at the time thinking, yeah, that'd probably be a really good idea, because I didn't know it was about 4 years by that point of me just feeling completely lost. So I followed that voice, and my marriage dissolved very quickly. Like it was like a tsunami. And you know, they say that the statistics of marriages breaking up over the holidays is very high, because there's this very pressurized container of, it's the holidays, let's all be happy. And if you're miserable, you know, it can end up being the thing that causes the explosion, right? The explosion of truth of, wow, this is really where I am. So that was definitely what happened for my ex. But what was amazing was that in this moment of losing everything, which for me was like, oh my God, not just I'm losing my marriage, but I felt like I was losing my opportunity to have a family, which was, wow, now we were really getting to what I wanted more than anything. And at the time I was 37, so it was very scary. But the marriage dissolved very quickly within a matter of 6 weeks. And I found myself going to a yoga class. And I was like, okay, I'm going to honor that voice that said, you need meditation. I'm going to buy a book on meditation. So I go into the book area of my yoga studio, and they've got these little like category tabs. And there's a tab that says meditation. I was like, okay, today's the day. And I pull out this book and I open it up, and it's like every word is popping off the page. And it was a book on Tibetan Buddhism. I was like, wait a minute. I was looking for meditation. This is about Buddhism. And so I just followed the path and started trying these different forms of Buddhism until I found the practice that was right for me. And it really was the saving grace to get me through a year where I literally was losing everything in my life. And yet here I was receiving what I wanted most, which were the tools. Why is this happening? How is this happening? What does this mean? Like, I finally asked for help and here it was coming. It was a miracle, really.
Many of our listeners practice yoga and meditation, and some follow Zazen. How did Zen practice shape your path?
Oh my gosh. So, as I said, I tried different forms before coming to Zen, Vipassana, Tibetan, Nichiren Daishonin, and they were wonderful and they were amazing. But I found myself feeling it's not quite it. And I did this intro to Zen training weekend. And as soon as I received the instruction, I was like, this is it. Like, I could just feel this relief and release in my body. And at this point, it had been about 3 months and I was already finding myself really craving silence, and really silence for the first time in my life. And Zazen is probably one of the most austere of the meditation practices. It really invites you into quiet, absolute quiet, and everything in my being, because there was so much chaos around me, just wanted that. It just wanted quiet. And so I found that Zazen allowed me to connect in with not just that voice, but actually connect in with my power. And it really came down to 2 main teachings that really turned things around for me. The first was, I am whole and complete as I am. I have a Buddha within. This was a radical concept to me. But because I was experiencing such confusion and shame around my addictive behaviors, around my affair, to be taught that I was whole and complete just as I am, oh my gosh, it just felt like a wave of compassion. The other teaching that had such a profound effect on me was change is constant. And I thought, well, if change is constant, that means I can change. That means my life can change. That means this situation and this fire that I'm walking through can and will change. And so these really became foundations for me as I was experiencing stillness and quiet and space. And I mean, I know that you have very, very strong spiritual connection and practices. And I imagine that the listeners that are listening right now can relate to that moment of just, oh, I'm okay. I'm okay. This isn't about me grasping something outside of myself. It's actually here within me.
You had mentioned that this took place for you in your late 30s. I had shared with you prior to beginning this interview that I had a spiritual transformation in my late 30s. Is there something about the late 30s that's an opening for people? That's
a great question. I can only speak from my experience, but I did hear, I remember when I was going through my divorce, I was looking at a lot of statistics. And they said that it's very common around the 15-year mark for things to fall apart, and also at the 25-year mark. So I was right on target with that because I've been married for 15 years. But I also think about my 20s. I mean, I got married right out of college. So I didn't have the 20s of exploration and all this stuff. I went right into my career and my marriage and just kind of like what it was, but there wasn't much reflection. And so I think of it more as a buildup of karma, a buildup of not having the tools and things just like swirling in my subconscious that were like, things got to change. And so again, I can really only speak for myself, but the tipping point for me was 37, because I can look back and see all the things that were leading up to it. And I mean, I even went through doubts when I was engaged to my first husband, 15 years prior, 16 years prior. So I feel like it was more of a buildup, if that makes sense, like a karmic buildup. And I honestly feel like it wasn't just my life, but that it was a karmic buildup through my family line that came to me. And when everything fell apart, I felt very strongly that I was the one in my family that was going to break that wheel.
And reshape that path.
Right.
One more question about your experience. When you would hear the voice, how did that manifest for you?
Yeah, it was quiet. It makes me think of, there's this musical theater song, and right now I'm blanking on what musical it's from, but it's called It's a Quiet Thing. And it's all about the voice of love, that when love comes in, it's a quiet thing. Everybody will tell you that it's bells and whistles and loud trombones and trumpets. You think like I'm a brass band from Sweet Charity. But it was a much quieter voice. And at that point, on that Black Friday, the voice that I had been accustomed to was the voice of my inner critic, which was very loud and very frenetic. The energy of it was extremely different, kind of like a push, push, push. It was like my nervous system, just like, oh, like you're not good enough. It's not going to happen, just feeding anxiety when I would be going in for Broadway callbacks or when I would really need to have an important conversation. But this voice was quiet and calm and just very straightforward. And so I'm so grateful for that moment, which was the beginning of me really waking up to life, like actual life, as opposed to what I was doing prior. And to have that experience to then use as a guidepost. Oh, there it is. Oh, yes. This not only sounds different, but it feels different. And what I experienced, going back to your question about Zazen, was that, boy, Zazen opened it up so much for me. So I would get off the mat and just have clarity. I would get down to that mat and something would just be swirling in me. How is this going to work? And by the time I got off the mat, I was clear.
Absolutely. My guest is Nikól Rogers. We're going to be talking about her new book, 13, One Woman's Sacred Journey to Discovering Her Greatest Power. Nikól, please share with our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you and your wonderful work.
Thank you, Victor. So this is pretty easy to remember. You can go to 13thebook.com. Very easy. 13thebook.com. Everything is there. It is also available at all major retailers, Amazon, barnesandnoble.com, Goodreads, pretty much all the main online retailers. But to keep it simple, 13thebook.com, and everything's there.
And what do you offer to people who come to your website? What services do you offer?
Yeah. So for people who come to my website, I have a couple of beautiful free trainings. You can download free chapters of the book if you want to get an idea of what it's about. That's at 13thebook.com. And then if you just go to NikólRogers.com, I actually have a pretty powerful training called Reclaim Your Confidence. So a lot of people might feel like they're looking underneath the bed or in the closet. Where did it go? At one point, I was full of spark and vigor, and now I'm finding myself questioning questioning and doubting, and why am I not taking the steps I want? And so this is a very simple free video training to take you through a sacred process to reconnect with your confidence again, because it's there. It's there inside. And then if somebody would like to come into my offerings, I have an amazing course called Powerful Presence that helps you to create your perfect audience, reclaim your confidence, and bring your fearless vision to life. I also offer private one-to-one coaching and VIP days.
And we'll be back with more of Nikól after these words from the Om Times Radio Network.
The cutting edge of conscious radio, Om Times Radio, IOM FM. Om Times Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. Om Times, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week is Nikól Rogers. We're going to be talking about her new book, 13, One Woman's Sacred Journey to Discovering Her Greatest Power. Nikól, what inspired 13?
Oh my goodness. The $10,000 question, right?
Yes.
So I went through this year of losing everything in my life. And I ended up discovering that I really wanted to take this teaching of transformation that had happened to me and teach it to others. And I was working with an amazing life coach who took me through all sorts of great exploratory processes, as coaches do, which led me to realizing I want to be a coach. This is the way I'm going to teach it, through this way. And so I got fully certified as a life coach and was going through all this training and launched my business. And so I started guesting on interviews. And I would lead with this story, the story of losing everything and how losing everything actually allowed me to create this amazing life, for me to actually connect with what I wanted. And every time I told the story, I would just hear silence or, oh my gosh, or me too. I saw it have this profound effect on people. And I also was writing a blog and talking about it. And it just seemed to be helping so much. So as I was seeing this, I was very clear that I would write a book about it, especially since at this point I was writing a blog consistently and really coming back to my childhood love, which was writing. So as an 8-year-old child, my favorite period of the day was creative writing. I couldn't wait for it. And I would write out my story and hand it to the teacher, and she would hand it back to me with top marks and usually tears in her eyes. I also had a lot of encouragement from my mother, who would do the same thing. So she wasn't grading my papers, but there was just this amazing amount of affirmation between that teacher and my mom. And my mom said to me, she was like this voice in my ear, one day you'll write a book. One day you better write a book. So of course, when I went into the performing arts, it's like, okay, all right, mom, I hear you, but I'm performing. Like, I don't know when the book's going to happen. Okay. But here I was at this complete change in my life. And here I was creating this coaching business, creating a global audience, and writing and loving it and returning to that love that I had when I was an 8-year-old. And so I said, okay, I am going to write a book about this year. Now, for anybody who's listening who owns their own business, it takes time to build a business from scratch. So each year there was kind of like the new thing I needed, the foundation to the business that needed to happen. And so it was like, okay, this year, no, I'm not going to write the book. No, this year I'm not going to write the book. There were some years where I thought I would, and then there was something else that popped up. But then what happened for me was, well, what we all know, right? The pandemic. And I also was going through a health journey and dealing with chronic pain and chronic headaches. And so I found that I needed to pull back from my client load so I could be placing my attention on my healing. And I had this open space and it was just calling me. Now is the time. And so I wrote the book in 2021 and it poured out of me in 5 months with no writer's block. And it was so clear to me that the book would be called 13. Not just because everything happened in 2013, but because I really wanted to dive into this concept of a 13. What is a 13? And how this number had been changed into something very not helpful and unlucky and evil, when it was always historically 13 has been a highly sacred, divine, feminine number. So as I was myself creating this life that was returning me back to divinity and sacredness, I wanted to bring forward 13 and honor it for what its original intention was.
Tell us more about that.
So I was just thinking too, when you were asking me what inspired this, I have to give a massive shout out to Elizabeth Gilbert. Because when I went through my divorce, I had a very close friend who put Eat, Pray, Love in my hands. And I devoured that book. And that book gave me such hope. As everything was burning to ash around me, here was this beautiful story of a woman who used her divorce to go on a spiritual journey and really discover herself, discover what she wanted, discover happiness and love. And so I really wanted 13 to have that kind of power. Same as in Eat, Pray, Love, Elizabeth Gilbert talks about the 108 beads. She was using numbers in a very sacred way too. And it was just planting that seed in me. Now, I will say, I do feel that a lot of the book was very big magic. Elizabeth Gilbert talks about in her book, Big Magic, how ideas come to you. And if you don't act on them, they go to somebody else. It's like this magical thing. And it's like, are you the portal? Are you the, what's the word I'm looking for? Are you the person that's going to take this idea and put it out into the world? And so I felt very much that with 13, that it had been gestating, but it was moving through me at that time to tell the story of what a 13 is, to help return 13 to its sacred beginnings, is that it's not an unlucky number. It's actually a highly lucky number because it offers you the opportunity to turn your life around. It's a moment of transformation. You find yourself there at a crossroads and you have a choice. You could say, gosh, this is just more the same. I'm unworthy. I'm not lovable. You could go down the spiral. And perhaps for where you are, that spiral has been happening a lot. But you could make a different choice in that moment. And the 13, this divine storm, is actually happening for you to transform your life, for you to transmute everything that has come prior. So it's this magical moment, and we've all had them. We've all probably had many of them. But I've been so passionate to place this idea in the world that devastation could actually be a sacred moment of transformation.
How may we identify the numbers, the sacred numbers that manifest for us in our lives, and how may we use these to achieve our dreams?
Well, I would probably say by looking at patterns of what is occurring over and over again. I'm a huge fan of Qigong, and within that tradition, they have meanings to the numbers. So 3 is a number of sacred union. 7 is a great number of transformation. They think of 9 as being this beautiful completion. So I feel like it's looking at the numbers that are repeating for you and then trusting the sources around you that can help guide you. So the teachers, the books, or the podcasts, the radio stations that you listen to that speak about this, to kind of gain an understanding about what is my sacred geometry? What are the patterns that I'm seeing are happening again and again? And are they happening within a series of numbers? Always on the 5, always on the 3. This happens to me again and again. How many times? So because so much fell apart for me in 2013, it really was a moment to go, wait, what does 13 mean? Because I could make it mean everything's falling apart for good. But instead, it was everything's falling apart so that it can rise for what I truly desire.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
You share that heartbreak may be the doorway to the life of our dreams. Please explain.
Okay, so this goes back to what I was saying before. So devastation, especially heartbreak, can put us in a place where we're losing a relationship that prior to losing it, we may have thought we would die without it. I know I felt that way. I thought I was going to be married to my first husband for the rest of my days. So it really, when everything fell apart and he was very clear that we were no longer on the same page, it felt like I was drowning. And I developed this cough, this chronic cough, which makes a lot of sense because the lungs are where we hold grief. Of course, I didn't know any of these things at the time. So I'm having weight loss because of the heartbreak. I've got this chronic cough. And so I went to a doctor because, losing weight and chronic cough could be something terrible. And I'll never forget, they took x-rays of my chest. And the guy came in to be like, okay, would you like to look at this? And I'm thinking, oh gosh, am I about to see like a mass on there or something like that? And I look up and see the most perfect, healthy set of lungs ever up on this x-ray. And he looked at me and he said, wow, you could probably stay underwater for a long time. I was like, oh my gosh, like not knowing that he doesn't know that I'm going through what I'm going through. This was the person that just took the x-rays, But it was such a moment of, oh my God, I can. And similarly, when I went to my Intro to Zen training weekend, and I had my first face-to-face teaching with the Zen teacher, we were supposed to bring a burning question. Well, I had a burning question. It was, how do you let go? And I walked in there and I got on the cushion in front of him and I bawled my eyes out. And he calmly grabbed a box of tissues and he put it in front of me and he said, are you okay without him? And it was like a wake up. It was like a complete pattern interrupt because I realized in that moment, much like looking at the x-ray, I'm okay. I'm breathing. I'm alive. So this is why heartbreak can be so powerful, because you've made up something in your mind that it would end your life, that your life would be over. And yet you end up realizing you're okay. And it's also a great opportunity then to come in contact with what you actually really want. So I had been hoping and controlling and doing everything I could to make this marriage work, wanting to have a family, but we weren't on the same page. So when everything fell away and I'm like there by myself, then I'm left with, I want a family. In the face of the destruction, it brought me into what was really alive. So that can be so powerful, and it only happens in the devastation, because I can speak for myself, but I was covering up with just trying to make the marriage work. Like all my energy was in that instead of those tools of, why am I destroying myself in so many ways? Why am I in this affair? Why am I doing all these things if what I really, if I'm still in this marriage, like, do I want to be in this marriage? So when everything fell away, it was like, oh, wow, I didn't. And what I really want is a family. So it put me on a path after my divorce to find a partner that was on the same page, that wanted to create a family. And I'm so happy to share that I became a first-time mom this year.
Congratulations. That's
Thank
wonderful.
You. Thank you.
I had a wonderful spiritual teacher who was well into his 80s when he was my teacher. And he used to say he'd get up in the morning and he'd have pain in his legs and his arms and his back, and he'd thank God. And people would say, you're in pain. Why are you thanking God? He said, because I'm alive and I have an opportunity to live another day and to do the work that means so much to me. That's really what we're talking about, isn't it?
It is, because I felt like I was dying. And then through the experience, connected with my will to live. And I think that's what was missing. This is why everything had to burn. Because out of the mud comes a lotus. Out of the ash grows forests.
Yeah.
Forests grow out of the ash. I mean, I can remember going to Hawaii on in 2015. It was my first time ever going there, and went to the Volcano National Park. And we got out, and there's all this ash, and coming out of the ash was this beautiful seedling. And I was smiling ear to ear, because at this point, it'd been 2 years. You know, I was really turning things around. I was like, there it is. This is what arises. Life arises. It's like what they say with, it's a Zen saying, is out of stillness, life rises.
Yes, absolutely. My guest is Nikól Rogers. Her book, 13, One Woman's Sacred Journey to Discovering Her Greatest Power. We'll be back with more after these words on the Om Times Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week, Nikól Rogers. Her book, 13, One Woman's Sacred Journey to Discovering Her Greatest Power. Nikól, what is a powerful presence, and how can it help someone live in alignment with their truth and transform their life?
So in very basic terms, a powerful presence is being okay with who you are. That's the most basic terms, but think about it. When you have walked into a room, when you have been in a conversation, and you're okay with the state of where you are, there's a relaxation, and that is felt by everyone around you. It's, your nervous system is relaxed. You're regulated. You're not looking for approval. And what it does is it creates that same beautiful energy in whoever you are speaking to, presenting, or performing to. So a powerful presence is a very magical thing, because we've all been there when we've come into a room, we've met somebody, or we've seen someone speak, or we've seen a show, and we just feel inspired. Like we're feeling this energy going through us, and we're feeling better. Like we leave the auditorium or the meeting or the conversation feeling better. So a powerful presence is really this beautiful, energetic loop that not only allows whoever is speaking to feel the relaxation of I'm okay, but for everyone that they speak to feel the same.
We shared before the interview that we both are poets. Why do you use poetry, and how does it help the reader have a transformative experience?
So when I was in 11th grade, so I would have been 16, I had this amazing English teacher, and he was all about poetry. And he was just one of those amazing teachers in my life and really encouraged it. And I found that I loved it, and it was just flowing out of me. And all through the rest of high school and college, it just became my mode of expression. I wasn't doing as much creative writing anymore. I wasn't doing stories. I was doing poetry. It's like when I was inspired, it would just come out more like free-form poetry. So when I was going through all of this devastation during 2013, poems were coming out at that time as well. What also was happening in that year was I became completely immersed in the work of Rumi and Hafez. And I bought 2 collections, the Essential Rumi and the Gift. And I dog-eared these. They just felt like they were speaking directly to my experience of where I was with losing everything and seeking answers and turning my life around. And so it wasn't just poetry was an expression for me. It was that poetry was an anchor and a guidepost in helping me to understand what was happening, because there was so much transformation occurring. And especially with like Rumi and Hafez, which are just such sacred, beautiful words, it felt like it was really nourishing me. So when I wrote the book, it was so important for me to include that. But also what I found when I went back and was putting everything together was that there were poems that it was almost like what the poem was expressing was completely parallel to what I was going through. So for instance, in the book at one point, I talk about being robbed. And this was after I'd been through the divorce. Like it was really traumatic. I had everything in my car stolen, and I was moving out of my apartment. It was like the closest I came to a complete breakdown. And there is a poem that talks about the friend coming in and striking anywhere with a knife, just trying to say, here is love. And it was such a beautiful expression of the state of desperation I was in, because I could have really, like, that could have been the end, after the divorce and then having everything stolen from my car. I could have just plummeted into the dark. but instead there was a rising that happened. And so it was really beautiful to go back and look at these poems that had spoken so much to me during the year and see how they were literally explaining where I was in my spiritual journey.
Absolutely. In your powerful presence trainings, one of the things you teach is the graceful creation of boundaries and the ability to say no. I wrote a poem about overcoming early wiring as a people pleaser. I had a strained relationship with my father and really never felt loved by him until he took ill when I was 8 and I became part of his caretaking team with my mother. That was the first time I ever sensed love from him, and it wired in my young mind that if you care for others, you will be loved. And that set a pattern in my life that continued into my late 40s until I realized that neglecting my needs was harmful on so many levels. And I learned to use the N word, no. And I wrote a poem called The Healing Power of No. May I share that with you?
Oh my gosh, please. You were talking about this before we started recording,
Yes,
so I've been
we
waiting
were.
for this moment. Here we go.
A time comes for choosing rather than losing the essence that makes us so. And in the bestowing, there's power in knowing the freedom that comes with no. When said with compassion, not angry in fashion, and letting the self-love flow, there's a sense of renewing and deep soul imbuing the awareness that comes with no. So with gentle voice and the power of choice and the courage to make it so, I'm still here, my friends. There's no means in this end, just the healing that comes with no.
I'm clapping. I don't know if you can hear it.
Thank you.
That's
Thank you.
beautiful.
Thank you. What are some of the other valuable lessons you share in powerful presence trainings?
Oh, another big lesson, and thank you for talking about the power of no, because that's a big one, is drowning out the noise. So speaking about no, it could be about the noise of yes, but what I like to think of is that it's the noise of everything and everyone in your life that is telling you who you are. And in today's world, that's quite a list. And it's no wonder that we suffer so much because we are brought up within a world and a society that we don't know who we are and that we don't have that voice within, right? We don't have a sage and a wisdom that can actually guide us in making decisions and creating our life. So in the course, I really help people to identify what the noise is and start to drown it out. Well, not drown it out, but to make new choices. And that it's replaced with practices, as we're talking about spiritual practices, it's replaced with practices that actually cultivate the quiet voice. They cultivate the wisdom and the sage. And so then, much like my experience, your experience, you then can understand actually what's occurring. When voices arise, to recognize, wait a minute, what's happening? Because whether it's the critic or whether it's the sage, they both want the same thing for you. They want you to thrive. They love you. All parts love you. It's just the critic might have a way of going about it that isn't helpful. But there is an unmet need there. There is something in your life that is not receiving the energy and the care that it needs. And so they're both pointing towards the same thing. And so this is a very large part of my work, which is allowing you to understand what is happening in your body. Because I believe that everybody knows best for themselves. They just might have some things they've got to make their way through to understand that. But ultimately, when they come to that point of understanding, then they're unstoppable. because they recognize that they have a power within that doesn't require them to always be seeking approval, to always be seeking answers outside of themselves.
The wisdom of my guest, Nikól Rogers, her book, 13, One Woman's Sacred Journey to Discovering Her Greatest Power. Nikól, one more time, please share with our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you and your wonderful work.
Thank you, Victor. So super easy, 13thebook.com. And that is all part of my website, which is NikólRogers.com. And yes, Nikól is spelled very differently, Nikol and Rogers, no D, but NikólRogers.com, 13thebook.com, and you can purchase 13 at all major retailers, Amazon, BarnesandNobles.com, Goodreads, bookshop.org. It's all there. And please, come over to Instagram. I'm there on Nikól, at Nikól_Rogers, and send me a DM. I would love to hear from you and hear what you thought of 13.
Nikól, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your experience, which came from pain, but developed into understanding and a deeper sense of self. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Victor.
And thank you for joining us on Destination Unlimited. I'm Victor the Voice Furman. Have a wonderful week.